Today is the very first episode of this podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leonard. I've been recruiting for the life sciences industry for the last 9 years. Coming up to 9 years. A year and a half ago, I launched my own company called Covenant Partners. And very, very simply put, Covenant Partners is working with CROs and CDMOs within the life sciences space. So we support even companies that work within the early drug discovery, preclinical, API, dosage forms, all the way to biologics and cell and gene space. That's a little bit about me for those who don't know me. Now, Iain is somebody that I've known for 6 years now. He is somebody that I highly respect, and I would go as far as saying he's a good friend. Iain's been in the industry for nearly 30 years, starting as a quality coordinator back in 1996. He's worked for companies like GSK, Ipsen, Andos, Aptuit, Dr. Reddy's in various leading positions, and has been leading a global CDMO since Jan 2023 as the Chief Quality and Regulatory Officer. He's done it all when it comes to pharma, biotech, and CDMO, starting from the bench to working his way up through pure dedication, putting quality at the forefront of every organization he has worked for, while obviously adding immense value. So it is with great pleasure and a real honor to sit down with Iain today to discuss his journey. And for those in quality today, either you're at a level of a manager, associate director, VPs, aspiring to become a leader in the future, this is for you. So on that note, Iain, thank you so much for joining. I think a great place to start would be how quality came around altogether for you. That would be a good point to start.
Yeah, well, I kind of fell into it, to be honest with you. I started out in my early teens wanting to be a pharmacist. Unfortunately, I didn't get my A levels as I needed to get onto pharmacy. It's something I'd always wanted to do from about 12, 13, 14 years of age. And unfortunately, didn't get onto the course at John Moores University, and I was put onto a sister course into pharmacy in Liverpool called Biomedical Sciences. I graduated through that and basically didn't really know what to do. I was applying to almost every science and pharma company I could think of to try and get a job. And my very first job was about 18 months after leaving university, and actually as a QC technician to start with for a very small biotech company called Tepnol, as it was back in the day. It's now quite a large pharma contract manufacturer and contract lab services, but back then it was just a small biotech company with, I think, probably about 15, 20 people maximum. And I started there at the bench doing ELISA and HPLC work, and we started going into ISO 9000. There was the QA manager and myself, and that was it, really. So the two of us, with help of the other staff, put a quality management system in. The company started to grow a little bit, and I basically got a few members of staff that were working for me, and I become the supervisor. And yeah, unfortunately, the company ran into some financial difficulties and some layoffs, and I then got a job in Glaxo in Liverpool, in the liquids laboratory, working basically starting off literally doing days and days and days of pHs and osmolarities, the basic wet chem stuff, and eventually got able to do the HPLC work and the GC work. That was just a contract role through, back then SRG, one of the biggest recruiters back then in the UK for part-time roles. And then essentially, just found my way into quality through QC. Went up into other biotech companies, building facilities in the Northwest. I then was lucky enough to join MedImmune as one of my big jumps as a tech transfer manager, working basically helping them build a facility that is in Liverpool. That's now the AstraZeneca site that was making the COVID vaccines. And I was moved from technology transfer, building facility, into basically QC manager, running wet chemistry, tissue culture, potency, TCID50 virology labs and PCR labs, and then went into tech services in Ipsen, making Botox, and then back into basically from there went into my own consultancy, and for about 4 or 5 years doing QA and QC stuff, and then eventually moved over to Germany, where I started with Sando, and then just kept going through the ranks of QA.
Really interesting. I think it's fair to say, obviously, from your experience, as you say, you started at the bench, and ever since you've worked your way up to being the chief quality officer most recently. What's been What's been the one thing you would say has been the thing that's kept you going in progressing? Obviously, you can talk about motivation, you can talk about other things, but what's been that one thing that's kept you going?
I just have a drive to succeed. Every company I go into, I want to try and make them the best ups they possibly can, and not just the company, but the staff within it. And in doing that, I basically help myself, and continually learning and developing all the time.
Love that. Um, I want to slightly change the topic here. Obviously, as far as your quality background, it is second to none, and we'll come back to that. But I think both you and I have a shared passion for fitness, which I've only found out recently. But am I right in saying you've trained with some of the big names in the UK in the fitness industry?
Yeah, back in the day, I basically started training at kind of 16 years of age. 18, I
Wow.
started training with my auntie, who was going in for competitions back in what was then Vic's gym in Liverpool. That was then bought out by a gentleman called Billy Jones, who was Mr. Universe. I used to train there on a regular basis. Then leading into going into my wedding, I basically become friends with Mr. UK and used to bodybuild with him 5, 6 days a week for 2 or 3 hours a day, going into our wedding to try and get myself fit.
I think I've said this to you before, and I think I said it to you the other day. People must be quite scared of you when you come into the site. Who is this pretty big British guy coming around?
Yeah, I do have people saying I have a presence.
That's good. That's a good sign for sure. I wish I started my journey when it comes to fitness at the age of 16. When I was younger, I think the thing or what I wanted to do was, go out with friends and just party as much as you possibly can. But I think now I've got a little bit older, I really appreciate fitness and business go hand in hand. You're a lot more switched on, you're a lot more on the ball if you look after yourself, and especially in leading positions, you have to make fast decisions. You have to be quick you have to think on your feet, and you have to be quick with the direction you're going to go in whichever situation. So I think fitness is a hugely important, I guess, area we both appreciate. Going back to quality, for those who don't understand quality in the simplest way possible, what is quality and why is it so important?
I think for me, I look around me and everything that you touch basically has had quality involved in it. You pick up
100%.
a pen, you pick up your mouse from your PC, everything you pick up has had to have some form of quality done. If you don't have quality in any product that's being manufactured, you might have some sales, but eventually people will stop buying it because you don't get return customers and you get bad reviews as the principal aspect. To get good money, good revenues, and good profitabilities and growth, you have to have a good product, and to have a good product, you need quality.
For sure, for sure. Quality is, I guess, over the course of my career, quality has been a focus, both in pharma and biotech when I was working for Hayes. Back in 2017, 2018, and throughout that it's been a focus, and every leader that I worked with has always emphasized on the importance of quality in an organization, which is so true. So I guess my next question then is, when it comes to obviously your career, it would be good to understand the examples of where you've worked, where quality has played a crucial role in the development of the business. And likewise, on the other side, obviously, in terms of, situations you've had before where quality hasn't been the focus in the business and how it's affected the overall business.
Yeah, I think I go back to one of the examples I gave you a few moments ago when, when I started in MedImmune, we basically, when I started in the company, we were in a really old office building that we were renting for the office staff, and we had part of a facility in another company, manufacturing, and we basically got our own building. And when I started, it was four walls and a roof, and there was trucks inside it. And we were working with the builders and the architect on a regular basis, building the facility through. And once it was completed, we had the quality checks of the facility to make sure it met the requirements that we needed. And then we moved in. And from that point onwards, it was quality, quality, quality for everybody. We had to basically build a facility from essentially the ground up, and we had to build the quality management systems from the ground up.
Well,
So as we were bringing in staff, I was working obviously in the QC departments, and we were bringing in staff. We were having starting from the very basics, gowning and how to write procedures, how to put your goggles on properly, how to put your gloves on in a microbiology lab, everything all the way through to enabling us to have an MHRA inspection and an FDA inspection so we can get our licenses. If we
Mhm.
hadn't have got those licenses and those accreditations, then we would never have been manufacturing, and the site in the UK wouldn't have happened.
It's as simple as that.
Simple as that.
It is as simple as that. Obviously, I say simple, but I imagine, that experience of building a facility, building everything from scratch, like you said, the quality management systems, pretty much everything from scratch must have been, I imagine, really chaotic on one side, but on the other side, I imagine it was an experience which you most likely appreciate to this day.
Yeah,
Would I be wrong in saying
absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're doing things like that, taking something from the very beginning, you think you've got everything, and then you do a mental check through, and you realize you've missed half a dozen procedures.
Yeah.
When you're doing run throughs and you're doing dry runs of things, you realize we haven't got a procedure for entry and exit into our laboratories. We haven't got this, we haven't got that, and it's all a learning curve. So you go through all of those processes, and then you go through internal audits, and you go through mock audits, all in a way to ensure that you've got everything in place that you need ready for those initial inspections.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's about moving everything in the right direction at the right pace without sacrificing obviously the quality, because at the end of the day, the industry obviously we work in is so crucial. The standards, the regulations, they all have to be met, because at the end of the day, that end product goes to patients. So it is of the, I imagine, the highest importance to make sure everything is done in the right way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, every time I pick a tablet up, which is, every morning, I take my medication every morning, and every day I pick them up and I say, thank God for people like me, working in this industry that are making these life-saving drugs, or, just the paracetamol or the ibuprofens that people just take for granted. Each one of them is made by a quality system and people who devote themselves to making quality the right thing.
Absolutely. It's, you almost don't appreciate it as when you go and take the tablet, because it's, especially if it's over the counter, you can just go and buy it. I think for that, you don't appreciate that has gone through so many different tests, so many different processes, regulations before it's packaged, shipped out, and before you can buy it. It's almost like you don't understand the process behind it, which obviously people who don't work in this industry wouldn't necessarily know. But I think it's important to raise that point. On the other side, over the course of your 30-year career, I'd imagine you've had situations where quality, as I mentioned earlier, hasn't been a focus, and I imagine that would have negatively impacted a business. Are you able to give any examples on that point?
I mean, I obviously can't name any
Of
specifically, but
course,
yes,
of
I
course.
mean, one of the things I've tried to build my career on is remediations. So, going into companies, whether that's, a large pharma or whether it's a PE-backed CDMO business that are maybe not doing as well as they should be doing in terms of compliance. And, they either know that there's an upcoming inspection in the next 6 months, or there's exits from the equity company where they need to have everything in place and have it perfect to get the most value out of the company.
Mm,
That, the people like myself are called in to help turn things around. I've done it in large pharma companies where I was doing some consulting, and I was pulled in to help with kappa remediations in an incredibly large pharma company, which you would never expect, but it
mhm.
happens. And I've also done it in very small companies that are exactly the same situation. So it doesn't matter whether it's large or small. There are sometimes things start to slip, and people are having to be called in to start the remediations to turn things around. To not just to make the numbers look right, but to change ways of working and mentalities around those aspects.
On that point, it's so important about the mindset, right? Everything comes down to mindset, and I've always been taught, and I've always believed culture trickles from the top. And whenever you go join a company, be that a pharma, be that a CDMO or a biotech, obviously it takes time to, as you say, turn things around. But I think that the biggest thing is changing people's mindset, which, if you're used to operating a certain way and somebody else comes in and tells you, no, this is the way, that's how you go forward, it takes time to get those people, I guess, into what you're doing. Would I be right in
Absolutely.
saying that?
Absolutely. People are the hardest things to change. You can go in and you can change policies and procedures overnight. I did some consulting for a very, very large company, and I said, you've had an overdue kappa, and it's overdue for 2 years. and all you need to do is update this procedure. It's one paragraph. Why is it taking you so long? When can you have it
Right.
done? And it was, oh, we'll do it in 12 months. And I said, why 12 months? And they said, well, that's when it's up for review again. And I was like, no, that's not good enough. And the next day they were invited individually to a meeting that they didn't know anybody else was coming to. And I had coffee and biscuits sat for them. And I told them all to bring their laptops. And basically, I had a signing party. And I had them down. They'd already reviewed the changes. And I had them
Right.
open the change control, update the procedure. Each one of them reviewed it and checked it and approved it all around the table. And we had it done in 10 minutes while we had a coffee. And I said to them, that's the mentality you need to have it. You need
Right.
to be doing
Right.
these things quickly. But when it comes to changing people, that's the longer term aspects that take the longest time. They take the biggest effort, and that's why usually they're the things that fail a bit the most.
Yeah, yeah, I've had this discussion with many leaders in the industry and managers, and changing people's behavior and how they operate. All of that takes a serious amount of work and a serious amount of time. I want to ask a question. So when it comes to that situation you just described, how much red tape is there to really shift things when you join a company or when you go in on a project basis and you're there to turn things around? How much red tape on average is there, do you think?
There can be a huge amount. And
Okay.
what you generally will find is there'll be more red tape within large pharma and large biotechs and that are the kind of the innovators than there is generally in the CDMO business.
Right, right.
Um, when you look at aspects, and this is probably the biggest differentiators between the two types of companies, are two things in my opinion. One is budgets. You know, your big pharma, big biotechs have a lot of money, and they can take the time and they can bring in a huge amount of people to do things. But they also only have themselves as a customer.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of inflexibility. The systems are very tight, generally not very risk based. When you move into the CDMO area, the budgets aren't as high, the money isn't as big.
right, right.
Revenues aren't as big, EBITDAs are not there, so the headcounts tend to be
So
smaller. But they're dealing with multiple customers, and they have to please them all. So you will generally find that there's less red tape to change and more kind of openness to change in the smaller CDMOs or even the big CDMOs as opposed to big farmers.
that brings me on really nicely to another question I wanted to ask you. Obviously, the importance of quality is super clear. How does quality differ? I think you've kind of answered that question anyway, but how does quality differ aside obviously the red tape between a big pharma and a CDMO? Is there much of a difference?
In terms of compliance, no. So everybody has to abide by the same regulations, as anybody in the pharma industry will appreciate. But what you'll find, as I said, the large farmers tend to be quite large, cumbersome aspects, whereas a CDMO is very agile. And,
Yeah,
if a Novartis comes in to order a CDMO and says we don't like this procedure, you will
right.
update it.
Okay,
If I go to Novartis and say, well, actually, I need you to change a procedure, they say, no, that's our policies that we're staying with that.
right.
So, you can challenge the big farmers and you won't get much change because they basically push a lot of their beliefs onto the smaller companies. And in that way, then you will find a quality system that is open to a huge amount more within a
Mhm.
CDMO business than it is in the large farmers.
For sure, for sure, and we've seen examples in the industry as well, where you get a farmer transitioning into a CDMO, and as far as my understanding goes, my knowledge goes, it's a tough thing to switch that. Although, like you say, the compliance is exactly the same. I think switching working in a pharma environment to a CDMO, it doesn't necessarily work because people are used to a certain pace, people are used to a certain way of doing things. Whereas in a CDMO, you have so many customers, you have to be a lot quicker, you have to be a lot more agile, as you said. So yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, when you transition into from a pharma to a CDMO, I guess then when it comes to Iain right now, what business does Iain belong in, and where do you believe you can add the most value?
I get asked this a lot, and generally by people like yourself. If I get approached and they're saying, what kind of company do you want to work for? As you said at the beginning, I've worked for the large farmers, I've worked for small farmer, I've worked for CDMOs, and people basically say to me, where do you prefer to be? And I don't really have a preference. What I like is to work in a company with like-minded people, people who have the same outlook and the same mentality as myself. So, seeing quality as important. seeing as the development of the company is important, taking things forward and not just looking at the bottom dollar. Um,
Yeah.
that for me is the kind of companies I want to work with. And, people can hold their hands up and say, yeah, we know we got some issues and we're here and we want to be up here. And I'm happy to come in and basically help them improve, help them be where they want to be and be the company they want to be. That for me is the most important thing.
That's really, really nicely put and very clear. Okay, I'm gonna slightly change the topic of the discussion. Before I ask the question, I want to give a disclaimer. So there's so much noise right now, obviously, about what's happening in the world. So much information constantly. On news channels, on LinkedIn, everyone. As far as I can speak from myself, I don't understand. It's so easy to get lost in all of these changes. I'm talking about the tariffs, the restrictions, issues with supply chain. I think that's been ongoing for a long time. Obviously, COVID really messed that up, and I think the industry has made some headway, but it's a long way off. The ongoing wars, this disputes, all of these disputes impact life sciences in one way or another. My question is this: in your opinion, how do you think the industry's changed dealing with these changes?
I think simply put, if you're looking at your large farmers, they're trying to, and a lot of these guys are moving out and using CDMOs to do a lot of
For
their
sure.
work. And I think what these guys are doing is they're building in redundancies into their supply chain. They're basically not just having primary, secondary, or third level suppliers to be able to supply them and putting them strategically around the world. So if anything happens in Europe, then they've got a supply chain from Asia or from the US and vice versa. I mean, I remember in COVID having meetings on Sundays when COVID first hit.
Yeah.
All of a sudden we can't get cargo from one region to another,
Yeah.
and there was discussions with supply chain, and one very good friend of mine who put the suggestion is, why don't we just buy a plane? Let's buy a plane that we can use to bring all of our products across, because we can't rely on the aviation industry because of the restrictions that we have in working environments. So I think that's what we're seeing. You've seen obviously a lot of investment going into the US. And just recently, I saw today, that Gilead had put in another 11 billion into tech ops and R&D on top of 23 million it already done.
Yep. Yep.
Novartis obviously have done it as well. Lilly with their multi-billion investments in the US. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. It's not that these decisions haven't been reached in the last 100 days, in my opinion. These are
Yep.
big pharma companies. These take a long time to basically have these things approved. But I think that's, if they're getting some big blockbusters in like Lilly and with the GLP-1s, they need to
Yep.
shore up that supply chain. And they're going to basically do everything they can to have strategic suppliers around the world to be able to supply them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's ever so complicated, ever so changing, and ever so sometimes crazy world we live in. I think the best thing to do is obviously adapt, and that's the way to survive. But I think it's so complex. Like you say, it's not like an overnight fix, and not one person has the answer because there's so many moving parts to this. It's just so complicated. I mean, COVID was in itself a crazy time, and when you look back on it, the whole industry adapting to working from home, all of these new regulations that came out, and all of that sort of stuff was tough, but we got through that, and we're here today, and obviously speaks volume about the industry as well in putting everything together to get the world to a safer place. Normally, a drug takes a long time. A vaccine takes a long time, and yeah, it's amazing to say the least.
Yeah, I had conversations with somebody. I was actually on vacation in Ireland just recently, and somebody asked, how did you get these vaccines to the market so quickly?
Yeah.
And when you explain to them the complexity of the development, the approval processes, and you say, well, normally when you're making a drug, you have a finite number of people that have the illness or the disease or the issue that's this particular drug is trying to cure. And then all of a sudden, so that basically reduces down your availability for your clinical trials. And all of a sudden, you've got hundreds of millions of people with a disease that
Yeah.
a lot of people are then more accepting to being included into trials. So the trials can happen quicker. And obviously, then the health authorities gave priority to these approvals as well. So when you explain these things to people, there's kind of a real appreciation as the work and the complexity of what happens. It's not just a case of, as some people think, somebody comes up with an idea, make it, and gets it onto the shelves. That never happens.
Much goes into that, and it's crazy. It's a great example in so many different ways. It's a real example of when people come together, when countries come together to solve an issue, we can really get to a place where we can make things happen. Obviously, whatever is happening in the world today, no one expected that, but it is the case. But it's a real shame from a political standpoint, all of these differences, all of these disputes, all of these, I guess tariffs is okay to mention as well, where it creates more of a drift and separation between people. But I think it's best when everyone works together. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Obviously there was the huge shift in the world, 10, 15, 20 years ago, moving and outsourcing to Asia, because of costs. You try and do R&D in Europe and US, it's got very high costs. You move it and offshore it to India and China, it's reduced costs. And you look at the amount of the starting materials and raw materials and APIs that are coming in from China and India. This basically keeping the farmer industry going.
Yeah.
And if that starts to move and move into Europe, then costs will increase because you have to pay the money to do all the transfers, you have to build the infrastructures, and all that has to be paid for in some way, shape, or form.
One has to hope for the best. One has to hope for the
Absolutely.
best, and I think that's the only way we can move forward. All of this, divide, all of these issues that are happening in the world. I hope, obviously, it gets to a point where people are more open to working together, as we were in COVID. And I think it will go back to that. It's just going to take some time. I want to ask you at the start of the in my intro, I mentioned, of course, for aspiring managers and directors and VPs who want to get to a point where they want to lead a company as a chief quality officer. What would be your message to those guys?
Keep at it. Hard work, be open. The worst thing you can be as a quality person is somebody that tries to police and dictate. You know, if you're going in to try and change people and trying to improve things, you've got to listen to people. If you go into production and you tell them you will do this, you will do that, it'll never work. You have to go in and speak to the people, understand their problems, understand their issues, understand what they do. And once you understand them, and you can then work with them more productively, is my biggest thing for me is, listening to people. I go into companies and I say, right, I've been brought in to take you from here to here, but you're the experts. Tell me how you would do it. If you have a clear path and all resources and money given to you, how would you do it? If I go in and dictate to them and say, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this, then it will fail. And
It
quality needs to be a friend to all of the departments and not being seen as the policeman. And I say it a lot of times, everybody that works in pharma is a quality person. You
yeah,
might be, the site head of operations, but you're a quality person that's the head of operations.
right, right.
You have to have those mentalities. And if you have that, then the quality people will be able to help you and they'll be more confident and hopefully they can progress and develop themselves.
It's such a good point. It's so simple as well. When you say it like this, it's so simple. It's listening to understand your people rather than telling them what to do. Most candidates I've worked with, where they have a leader where they are leading from the front, and people feel like they are heard, and people feel like they are being listened to, those people go much further and put in a bigger effort in whatever the issue is at whatever time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. People always work better if it's their ideas and their thoughts that they're working on, rather than other
100%.
people's.
Exactly that. Exactly that. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
LinkedIn. Um,
Okay.
I'm on there pretty well 24/7. I've been using LinkedIn since it first came into kind of interest, and I use it on a regular basis. I have lots of people reach out to me on a regular basis. People like yourself sometimes asking for help and support. Do I know people in my network? I have people that contact me that I've been in school or university and they're looking for how do I get into things. I will answer all people's messages. I give them as much help and support as I can. So yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest thing. I get it literally instantly and I can respond straight away.
That's awesome. I think you mentioned earlier, obviously, when you left university, it wasn't clear what the path is going to be, and you applied to tons of jobs, but it still wasn't clear. And I think even in today's world, for young grads, it's not like once you do a degree, I don't think it's a set path where they know how to get into the biotech, into the pharma or life sciences world as a whole. So I think the fact that you're open to helping and giving advice on that is an awesome thing. And it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you jumping on this.
That's no problem.
The whole idea was to add value and help in whichever way we can to the young guys in quality. So thank you so much, Iain, and we'll talk soon.
No
We'll
problem.
meet up soon as well.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Bye now.
Bye.